Okay, so we hope today that everything will be quite informal and that you will feel comfortable asking us questions and expressing some of your concerns to us, and if there is any way we can respond to those, we will. Okay, just a little bit about Las Americas. We are a non-profit agency. That means our goal is not to make money. Our goal is to serve people, and we charge, when we do charge, we charge what we consider minimal fees. Everything is not free, but the charge is minimal. We are 24 years old, and we've done asylum work since the very beginning of Las Americas 24 years ago. We provide legal advice and representation to immigrants, and that means representation in immigration court, before an asylum officer, or before the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service. Okay, we focus on refugees and asylum seekers. In asylum, when you write one application for asylum, you're actually applying for you can apply for 3 forms of relief at one time in one application. It's called an I-589, and it is application for asylum, Convention Against Torture, which is called CAT, and the withholding of removal. This is the type of protection for refugees who flee their country because they fear persecution, or they have a well-founded fear of future persecution in the countries.
Okay. For asylum, under the U.S. immigration law, under the INA, you must show that if you go back to your country, that there is a reasonable possibility that you will be persecuted. And we put 10%. There's a U.S. Supreme Court case that says that you have to prove a 1 in 10 chance that you will be persecuted. It's a very low threshold. It's not as easy as it sounds. 1 in 10 chance is pretty easy to meet, but you still have to meet other things. But if you can show you have a 1 in 10 chance that you'll be persecuted on the basis of, well, before we even get that, you have to show that it's either by the government or groups that the government cannot control or will not control. For instance, like in Mexico, we've been seeing a rise in asylum seekers because of the drug cartels, and the drug cartels are out of control. And in some parts of Mexico, the drug cartels are controlling some of the politics, some of the local economies. They're collecting taxes. They're acting like a de facto government. So where you can argue and say, hey, it's not the Mexican government. Nevertheless, you have this group that's out of control, the drug traffickers, and you can't control them. And sometimes there's evidence that the government's working with those organizations. And so that's why asylum has those 2 components. It could be directly by the government, which is a stronger case, and then it could be a group. But it also has to be on one of the 5 things. And if it's not under one of those 5 things, then it's not asylum. It has to be on the basis of your race. It has to be on the basis of your religion. It has to be based on your nationality. It can be based on your political opinion. And also it can be based on your imputed political opinion. So for instance, if you were, didn't like Mr. Gaddafi and you had an opinion about him, or maybe you don't have an opinion, but he thinks you do. Maybe he thinks that you have Western values. You've been studying in America now, and maybe now you've become Americanized, and now we think you might be a traitor. You might not want to join my military, my government. He thinks that, and maybe it's not true, but if he thinks that and you can prove it, then that's what we call imputed political opinion. Another way, the political opinion would be, a typical case, prototypical case for asylum would be a reporter who's doing his job. Like in Mexico, we have some cases where reporters are being persecuted by the government because they're covering, corruption stories, and the government calls them and says, "Hey, you guys have been exposing us too long. Watch your back. We're tired of you, reporting on this corruption, and if you don't stop reporting, we're going to kill you and your family." So that would be like a political opinion. It could be also maybe a guy that's a human rights activist in a country. For instance, someone in Mexico that maybe does protests, maybe is organizing, with the Human Rights Commission, and maybe he's going after government officials, and then that person's targeted. That's also could be seen as political opinion. Another example of political opinion could be someone who reports something, maybe government waste, maybe government fraud, like a whistleblower. That also, there's been cases that says that could be political opinion. So I'm just giving you examples from different cases. And then the last one, it's called you belong to a particular social group. So what is a social group? Well, a social group, in asylum law, let me tell you something about asylum law. Asylum law is a little bit outdated with what's going on in the world. In the world right now, there's wars going on. There's people fighting for different causes. And asylum law doesn't keep up with that. Asylum law was, really it was during like World War II, the Nazi persecution. There's historical, in asylum law, it was historical. There was refugees coming in, the Jews were trying to get out of Nazi Germany, and so it has, the law was created for that context. But the world has evolved, it has changed. But the asylum law doesn't keep up with that. And so they came up in the 1980s, they came up with this social group to try to encompass, to broaden the asylum law. So a social group could be a female. It could be a female that's maybe is being forced into a marriage. That could be a social group. Because maybe in that country it's okay, but in the U.S. it wouldn't. But if it's offensive for that woman, she could argue and say, hey, that goes against my principles. I don't want to be forced into a marriage. So she belongs to a woman who's forced into a forced marriage. That's a social group. It could be somebody that it could be based on the color of your skin. So if you're born with dark skin, that's who you are. And suppose you're walking around and the government says, well, I don't want people with dark skin. I'm going to start arresting people with dark skin. Then that's persecution. Why? Because you have a characteristic that's an immutable characteristic. That means that you can't change it. Like you can't change the colors of your eyes. You can't change the color of your skin. You can't change what family you belong to. So you can think of a dynasty too. Suppose you're born into a dynasty and they're trying to kill off all the dynasty. That could be a social group. It could be your nuclear family. It could be your tribe. It could be kinship. Those are examples of a social group. What the Board of Immigration Appeals have told us is that you have to show that it's an immutable characteristic, something that is fundamental to your conscience, and that you have to have some social visibility. So what does that mean in regular English? That just means that if I see you walking down the street, I could say, well, that, like if I go to Mexico, I can say, that's an indigenous person. I can tell by the person's clothes, their features, by their language, they have an accent, their dialogue. They're not Mexican. They're indigenous. And suppose those people were being persecuted, then that is a particular social group. So those are the 5 categories. And those are some examples that I gave you guys.
Well, okay, if a person is granted asylum, it's the most generous form of relief. It's the most generous form, more generous than withholding of removal or the Convention Against Torture. And the reason it is because if it's granted, then you're allowed to stay in the United States. You are allowed to begin to work immediately. You are able to apply for work authorization.